Over the New Year period, as many of you know, we ran a couple of videos in which we interviewed important people in the world of cleaner, greener, safer and smarter vehicles. Today's video, with Aptera founders Steve and Chris, is the last of those videos. It was due to go out over New Year, but for reasons related to my personal health and also some issues with the sound on Chris's side of the recording, it's taken a little longer than we normally would to produce. But I hope you enjoy it today. 2020 has been a crazy year, and for most of us that's meant that we've ended up doing less than what we'd hoped to do originally. But on this channel, we've been able to start a new series which I think has been actually quite fun. It's a series where instead of just driving electric cars and discussing the latest news in the world of cleaner, greener, safer and smarter transportation, we actually get to interview and chat with the people who are making that transition happen. So far, we've talked to Peter Rawlinson from Lucid. We've talked to one of his colleagues who's responsible for bringing the Lucid Air into production at the new facility that Lucid has been building in Arizona. We've chatted to engineers from both GM and Cadillac about the new Chevrolet electric vehicle lineup, as well as the Cadillac Lyriq. But today, as a special holiday treat, we've got not one but two very important people in the world of cleaner, greener, safer and smarter vehicles. That is Steve Fambro and Chris Anthony, who together co-founded Aptera Motors way back, more than a decade ago. And then Aptera disappeared for a bit, and we'll discover why in today's chat. But now Aptera is back. It's better than ever before. And disclaimer, I am one of many people who has put down a $100 deposit to own one, partly because I love three-wheelers, partly because I love the ethos of Aptera, which embraces the right to repair movement, which is extremely different to the rest of the automotive industry in some ways, or certainly the electric automotive industry. And also it's a very ultra efficient vehicle. But I'm going to try and keep my personal beliefs of the Aptera and what I like and don't like about that car kind of off to one side. I'm going to put my journalist hat on and I'm going to chat to both Steve and Chris. Welcome to the show, both of you. Steve, it's been a really long time since we last chatted.
About 10 years. I think it was just at the start of Fambro, or maybe when we moved into our new building, and it was by Palomar Airport, just a few miles down the road. And I think we talked about the founding of Aptera and also the demise. And I was counseled at the time by friends and other executives to just speak very kindly and lightly about the management team and not really go into what happened.
And now things are back, Chris. This is... Does it feel good to be back at Aptera?
It does. It's an exciting time. The industry has grown up a lot over the last decade. When we started Aptera last time, there were so many things that just didn't exist. I mean, they didn't have any kind of charging standards. The SAE J1772 didn't exist. We didn't even have a way to plug in the Aptera. We were using charge cords from marine products like shore power, boat plugs, and the like. And then that was a cascade down to all the other parts of the vehicle, DC to DC converters and, high voltage interconnects and safety stuff. It just didn't exist. So we were having to invent everything. We built a large team to do that, but it was all an uphill battle. And now that we're coming back with a refresh on Aptera, it's a much different climate. And it's a lot easier to access the supply chain and vendors. And it's just exciting to think about, the thousands of people that now have pre-orders on Aptera, getting those vehicles out on the streets, in the next couple of years.
And the customers are there too. People want electric vehicles.
Yeah. They do. And it's certainly a very different electric vehicle to everything that's currently being offered. Now, Steve, you started Aptera because you wanted something that was different, something that was not an electric motorcycle, but close enough to it that you could drive to and from work, that gave you that same feeling, that was energy efficient, that was lightweight. And so Aptera was born. Tell us about the original Aptera, and then we'll maybe talk about the new reincarnation of the vehicle. What's different, what's the same?
Well, there's a creative phase that people can enter before they have children. And that was my creative phase. And so, I had the luxury of, I was married, I am married, but didn't have children at the time. So I could start the coffee early in the morning and spread out my work on the living room floor and not eat or talk to anyone all day and just go through this creative flow. And it all started because I wanted to build an electric vehicle to drive in the carpool lane by myself, so I could get to work quicker. And I did some research, talked to people that had converted cars, and found that they would get 20, 30 miles range. And that, of course, that was unacceptable. But as an engineer, I wanted to know why. I wanted to know why the range was so low. So that sent me down the rabbit hole of discovering how much efficiency affects electric vehicles, starting from reading every textbook I could find on solar electric vehicles and those eco-marathon vehicles, and trying to understand from first principles, well, where does the energy go? Well, the energy goes to push the air out of the way. And once I made that connection, everything fell into place after that. It was, how do we push the least amount of air out of the way? And that was around the time I met Chris, and we decided to start the company.
Chris, you have a background in marine composite materials, correct?
Yeah, when I met Steve, I was starting a boat company called Epic Boats. We built wakeboard boats and fishing boats for a long time. But early on, I had investigated different composite technologies, and I went and toured other boat manufacturing plants. And it was every plant that I went to was dirty and stinky, and it was a harsh environment, let's say. So I started researching, well, what would be a clean environment? And really, we fell into a thing called resin infusion. And it's all done under bag, and there's very little smell. And, you can walk into a plant, and it's like walking into a biotech lab. It's not like walking into a stinky factory. So I iterated on that, and we had the largest resin infusion shop in the world for a long time at Epic Boats. And then I met Steve through a mutual friend down here, and he showed me this idea for this aerodynamic dream machine. And, I have a background in computational fluid dynamics and the hydrodynamic side. So I instantly got it. I said, that's exactly. You use 60% of the energy at highway speeds in a typical sedan, just pushing air out of the way. So if you could take that aerodynamic drag down to zero, you'd have instantly 60% better fuel economy. If you can make the vehicle lightweight and an efficient powertrain and run it on electric, holy cripes, man, you could have a really, really compelling offering. So, we hugged it out and started the company, and then, the rest is history.
The irony for the engineers in the audience is that I was using CFD to lower the drag of the vehicle, and he was using CFD to increase the drag of his boat to make a bigger wake for wakeboarding. So it was opposite purposes, but same tool, same process. So we understood what each other were doing.
It's quite interesting to note that, you've both had that interest in fluid dynamics and understanding how drag works. And that's obviously helped you in the design of Aptera. The original Aptera was designed with a couple of different options. I think your first version was a hybrid, and you were planning on having a hybrid version and then having an electric version. Your initial kind of reveal, I think, was 2007, 2008. I remember seeing you on the cover of, I think it was Wired magazine. And then you competed in the X Prize, the Automotive X Prize. Now, at the time, what was the figure that you were achieving with the original Aptera?
98 mpg.
Yeah, I mean, even back in the early days, the very first iteration that we put on the ground was a single-cylinder diesel motor. And that was just trying to prove the efficacy of a super aerodynamic lightweight vehicle. And we took it out to the desert and got 430 miles per gallon.
330.
And
300. 400. Honestly, I can't remember, but I remember it was a HOTS, H-A-T-Z, HOTS diesel engine, a German engine. And it was mounted right behind my head. And it was very loud and very uncomfortable. But it was with the body that we had designed, Chris and I, with a mechanical engineer, without the automotive designer. So it was awful from an ergonomic perspective. And so once we brought Jason Hill in, he's who gave us the shape that we have today. But the original vehicle, I think, was upwards of 300 plus miles per gallon. But that was a single-cylinder diesel. It was an awful vehicle, but it did its job. It proved the science. It proved that it worked. It let us get to the next step and show that what we could really do.
The best part was the rubber tube that was too close to the motor that basically caught on fire in the first test, and Steve decided to pull over rather quickly as the vehicle filled up with smoke. But luckily, it was just a tube we had to move out of place, and then we could get back on the testing road.
Well, we fast forward. Obviously, we've got the all-electric version now. We had the all-electric version then. One of the things that people come up with again and again and again, and I think, Chris, this is the question that lands squarely in your area of expertise. Although, Steve, please feel free to chime in. People look at the shape of Aptera and they say there's no way that thing is safe, there's no way that thing is stable, and there's no way that thing is going to survive a crash with a dually Ford 350 pickup. So let's talk about the actual construction, the CFRP panels and everything else, and how that goes to giving it the structure that it has and what that means for safety.
Yeah, the body and the construction of the Aptera is really innovative. Its main structure is composed of only 4 parts. There's a spider on the top, and there's a tub on the bottom. It comes together like this, and then 2 side panels that come together like this. And basically what you've created is a monocoque structure that's boxed out on every point and filled with foam that becomes incredibly strong. When we first met and we first started talking about composites, he wanted to build a lightweight frame and then put an aerodynamic body on top of it. And I said, no. If you're going to do composite lightweight body panels, make it a monocoque structure like a Cirrus aircraft or a Formula One car. It'll be indestructible. It'll be like nothing else that's on the road today. And that's exactly what we did 10 years ago. Was we had a whole composites team and facility. We had our own crush jigs to test the composites over time. And the previous iteration of the vehicle actually had the highest roof crush strength of any passenger car on the road, and it exceeded FMVSS safety standards by 4x because composites are just strong. They don't look like steel parts, but if you design a properly built composite structure, it's incredibly strong. So, it's a different type of vehicle. It looks strange. I think people think that it might be unsafe because in pictures it looks small, but it's really not small. It's as wide as a Model S and it's as long as a Prius. So, in terms of its size, it's not this dinky, smart car, very tight, compact thing. It's got room for days, and it's got structure that will protect you in an impact. And that's been one of our number one goals. We really started out and we said, we don't want to make a really unique vehicle that people, would feel unsafe driving. If it's super unique, then it's got to be beyond reproach in safety. So from the front subframe and the way it would fold up in an impact to the passenger safety cell, we've really focused on stuff like that. Side impact strength for the doors. I think we've given it great due care, and the results, have shown to be very, very good in our past tests.
From a vehicle dynamics point of view, the margin of stability, all those sorts of factors are the same or better as any comparable electric vehicle. And just to elaborate a little bit on FMVSS, I think 214, 217, I don't recall, but the door crush standard and the roof crush standard, that we built all those machines and crushed many bodies until we got a process and a layup schedule and material selection that we felt, not only achieved those goals, but did so at minimum cost and weight.
We had that extraordinary strength in a main body that weighed less than 200 pounds and is made, with only 4 parts. So I think, compared to a steel vehicle that has to be machine positioned and welded and is made of a couple hundred parts, when you look at our composite structure, it's just totally different than anything in automotive today.
One of the things that obviously comes off of crash test reliability and strength is repairability. Now, with the BMW i3, for example, which is a car that used a heavy amount of composites, there became a real problem with crash test repairability or crash repairability. And that was that a lot of dealerships, a lot of specialist accident repair centers didn't have the skills or the know-how to repair the i3 when it had been involved in a collision. Is that something that you've all thought about with this very unique to the automotive industry construction method? How do you prepare the repairer industry for dealing with Apteras that have unfortunately been involved in an accident?
Yeah, we have rear and front impact structures. So if you get into light accidents and anything, you can always buy, a new hood, new inner fenders, new components for the front subframe, that sort of stuff. Same thing in the rear. It's a replaceable bumper assembly. So if you got into a rear end accident, the main body of the Aptera is, another thing. It's super tough, super resilient. You would have to get into a pretty aggressive impact sequence to have anything happen there. But when you compare it to a steel vehicle, the interesting thing in a steel vehicle is, once you crumple that steel, it does not rebound. Once it's crunched, and you'll see many accidents where they try to pull out the rear end, but the vehicle's never the same when you do that. But if you were to have a serious incident in one of these, you could replace the composite shell relatively easy because of the way we build the vehicle. We have a front subframe assembly, a rear subframe assembly, and an IP stack, the interior components, and you would find that in a severe accident you would spend tens of thousands of dollars on a passenger car fixing crumpled in metal for a whole quarter accident. The same thing could happen here where you really damage a quarter of the vehicle, but we have measures to basically send you a new composite part if you need it for stuff like that.
I think the key takeaway though is most of when you look at a vehicle that's in an accident today, like a regular passenger vehicle, you're looking at the extrema, the bumpers, the front area, maybe the sides, the doors. Those areas are replaceable easily on this vehicle. And the kind of damage that would send you to the body shop in a typical car is probably just going to be surface finish, surface painting and scratch removal here because the structure is so tough. So it's not going to dent and crush the same way it would a shopping cart in a parking lot or a light accident. And most of the things that are in the periphery are replaceable.
An interesting thing with a flat-sided vehicle is you take all the impact to that flat side. When you have a nice rounded surface, it's very rarely going to hit anything except a deflection point, right? So it's it'll act a lot differently in typical automotive accidents, and we think that'll be favorable for our customers and decrease their need for any kind of serious body work.
When you are talking about handling, again, three-wheelers have a notorious reputation in the automotive world, partly because of Jeremy Clarkson and the things he did with the Reliant Rialto, but also because of other three-wheelers, and people inherently see a three-wheeled vehicle as being unsafe. Now, Aptera gets around this in one regard, because it's a 2+1, which is inherently a lot more stable than a 1+2. And I've driven several 1+2s, owned one myself. And yes, I managed to turn one over once, but that's because it had a total width across the vehicle of probably a couple of feet, as opposed to the Aptera, which you've already said is as wide as a Model S. How do you address the concerns of people who say this vehicle can't be stable?
I think we can talk about it and show video or show data and talk about it a lot. I think what people need to see is they need to see these vehicles in different situations on a racetrack, around town, aggressive driving, handling in the snow, handling in the rain, going over potholes. I think people just want to see that. And I think once you see it and it registers that, it's doing it just like any normal vehicle, then I think that'll go away. It's a novelty of this because it hasn't been in production, because people haven't seen it on the road en masse, that people still ask that question. But I think if we can show, me beating Chris in his other electric car around some racetrack, for example, why then, that might help answer some of those questions.
There's been a big change in technology since the original Aptera. The new Apteras are now using in-wheel motors, which a lot of the engineers in the audience are going to start talking about unsprung mass. It uses a completely different battery setup to the original Aptera, and the longest range variant of the Aptera is promising 1,000 miles, 1,600 kilometers per charge from a 100 kilowatt hour battery pack. Is that something that you think makes Aptera more appealing to people compared to what it was 10 years ago? Certainly the cost seems very different.
Well, I think in our studies of the market, before we decided to restart Aptera, I mean, we studied the market in great detail. Now we've got almost 10 years of electric vehicle sales data to go and mine and look and see what models responded well, who sold the most units through this period of time. And we have a formula that we developed, I think, to characterize all the different factors. But very clearly what we discovered that range was it was one of the largest determining factors of what drives volume, sales volume. And so I think that people are going to look at that as a big lever that can be pulled to make the vehicle more desirable, because traditionally, although it's unspoken, I think people still had a psychological hang-up about range. And so when you go 300, 400, 500, 600, it just goes away. It's just absurd. You don't even think about it anymore. So now it's gone off the table. It's not even a factor. So I think that's how the range plays into the desirability.
Affordable range is something that all EV makers really struggle with. And we identified that as a problem with their efficiency. We're in the middle of the EV truck wars. 600, 700 watt hours per mile. And when you burn that much energy, you have to have a really large battery pack. 200 kilowatt hours of battery pack on some of these new, SUV and pickup truck EV models. And when you have that big a battery pack, you have to pay a lot for those batteries. So if you can use a sixth of that energy, if you can burn 100 watt hours per mile instead of 600 watt hours per mile, you pay a sixth for that battery pack. And the battery cost is the number one cost in the bill of materials of every electric vehicle manufacturer. So, for us to burn so little energy means that we can use much smaller battery packs. That means that we can provide a $26,000 vehicle that can get you 250 miles range in a very innovative package that does a lot for your energy use and impact on the planet. So it all comes back to our energy use per mile. It's a trickle-down effect that affects your charging, it affects your battery pack size, it affects how much material you use in the actual vehicle that you're creating. So we like being really efficient.
It also means our financial model works without government incentives. So we can deliver a vehicle that's profitable, that people will buy, that's at the right price range, but without government incentives. So we think that's key to be sustainable, because, government administrations, they change things, they change incentives, they come and go. So why not make a financial model that works despite those incentives?
It's interesting to see the correlation between the electric vehicle market and where you were and where you are now in terms of what you are hoping to offer the general public versus where photovoltaic solar panels were 10 years ago and where they are now. I've actually been working on putting a 16 kilowatt hour peak array on the house. Buying something that size a decade ago would have been financially crippling. It would have been out of our price range. Now it's actually within our price range, thanks to the help from a local credit union. It feels like Aptera is in that same position. You're no longer talking about 100 miles between fill-ups. You're actually talking about 250 miles for the base model, 1,000 miles for the range topping model, and then 400 and 600 in between. Now, you've touched on kind of well-to-wheel figures a little bit, talking about the cost to produce the vehicle, and you're able to produce the vehicle for a lot less than other automakers offering much larger, less aerodynamic vehicles with similar ranges. Have you actually done a well-to-wheel life cycle analysis for this and how it compares to other electric vehicles on the market today?
Yeah, it's an interesting analysis, and it harkens back to their fundamental premise. There's very few electric vehicle manufacturers out there that started with the premise of we're going to build electric vehicles and we're going to make the world a better place because of it. Anybody that has kind of dual alliances and are building gasoline vehicles and electric vehicles, it's a lot harder for them to balance that equation. And I think the companies like Tesla and a couple others now are doing much better at that because they started with the ethos of we want to make the world a better place by providing efficient electric vehicles. And same thing with us as we really started to architect the company again and really start to think about how we impact the planet. It's through using less materials, using less batteries to fuel the same distance, and using very eco-friendly build methods and materials. I think it all comes together to really balance out something that we can hand consumers that they can feel good about how it impacts the planet and their pocketbook.
When the team did enter the Automotive X Prize, they did that analysis with the lab in Virginia with all the other entrants, and we would want to maybe redo that analysis considering the addition of the solar cells today and how much of the energy burden that removes versus the extra energy burden of creating the solar cells. So we have not done that complete new analysis, but that would be a good exercise for us to do.
And that's something, obviously, that you guys are kind of reinforcing, because steel construction methods, even aluminium, requires an awful lot of energy to make the stuff, whereas you're not involving high temperature processes when you're making these composite materials, are you, Chris? What kind of temperatures are we talking about?
Ambient temperatures and the cure temperatures are a lot of the composites are under 80 C. So they're great for mold life. They're great for longevity. We've been using UV composite methods now that get the cycle time down to 20 minutes apart. It's just instead of using chemical catalysts to get the resin to kick off type thing. So UV curable resins are just a more environmentally friendly way to build composites. And I think it's, again, a trickle down on using materials and methods that just have the least impact possible. Welding and, unhuman positionable parts get very difficult. It takes a lot of energy to weld up a vehicle. When you have 200 parts and they have to all be machine positioned, not only you're paying for the parts and the welding, you're also paying for the machines that have to put that together. So human positionable parts that can be bonded together, I think just makes for a much different way to manufacture a vehicle.
Which brings us really nicely to solar energy and solar cells. The original Aptera, I think, had a small solar array, but now you're offering several different solar panel options under the Never Charge brand name, effectively. How hard was that to integrate into the vehicle? I mean, you're not the first company to put solar panels on a vehicle. There are a couple of companies in Europe that are doing exactly the same thing. But again, solar panel advances, I'm assuming over the last 10 years, have really helped with that.
Not so much for us. It's very difficult. The solar cells advancement have been fantastic, but mounting them with our curvature and our level of convexity around the body is challenging. We've made a lot of improvements and advances in that and have some IP related to that now. But I would say when you look at the old Aptera, or even any old vehicle beforehand, the amount of energy differential that you get from adding solar cells was so minuscule. It was almost like a parlor trick or a curiosity. It didn't really do anything. But once you hit this crossover point with the efficiencies where you can generate 10, 15, 20 miles range, then the light goes off in your mind. You say, we have to find a way to cover the entire damn surface with those, but in a way that looks desirable and artful, and also is part of the ethos, because then adding incremental solar cells gets you directly more miles. So we're at that crossover point with this vehicle. We weren't there 10 years ago.
Yeah, in my mind, it was really, North American drivers average 31 miles a day of driving. In Europe, they average less, 26 miles a day of driving. So we had about 120 watts of solar on the previous Aptera, and now we're able to up it to 700 watts. On a sunny day in Southern California, that could get you, 4.4 kilowatt hours of power. That's 44 miles of range at 100 watt hours per mile. So that's a significant range. And for me, it was, as soon as we started doing the early calculations and we built our first test setup, which has been running for almost a year now, and we started to get some real data and then plug that into the National Renewable Energy Lab's database to see how it would react, in other parts of the world. It was like, this thing could really be a vehicle that the majority of people could buy and never have to plug it in. I think that is kind of a convention shattering metric. When the majority of people could purchase this vehicle and never have to plug it in, it has no impact on the grid. You don't have to worry about, any kind of charging infrastructure at the home. But if you do go on a longer trip, you can just get home and you can plug it in with a 110 outlet and get 200 miles of charge range overnight. So, it all comes back to the energy efficiency of the Aptera, and we can do a lot with a very small solar area. Whereas if you burn 700 watt hours per mile on an EV pickup truck or an EV SUV, you would have to have a solar panel bigger than a semi truck on top of your vehicle to get any, useful range out of it like we're doing. So, I think it's just this confluence of we're focused on efficiency, and that trickle down of efficiency has so many positive effects. The solar is one of them, and I think it's one of the most compelling attributes of our vehicle today.
In terms of where you are now and where you were, a lot of people are confused about what happened with the original Aptera. Now, I'm not necessarily someone who believes of speaking bad of those who went before. But is there a kind of a 50,000 foot view that you guys would be prepared to give us as to what actually happened and got to a point where you both left Aptera, but now you're back and you rebuilt the company from scratch?
Yeah, we had some amazing people working at Aptera a decade ago. We innovated in so many areas and built an amazing vehicle platform that did things like, having the highest roof crush strength of any passenger vehicle on the road, along with super efficiency. The economy kind of crashing in 2009 was a very difficult time. And the DOE loan program getting heavily altered after the Solyndra bankruptcy, really had an impactful, result on Aptera. But, sometimes people, even in the best of businesses, the best of time, the best of sports teams, they don't agree with the direction. And they can still be great players and they're, your star players, but, they think that they need to just pass the ball to somebody else. And we had a fundamental disagreement with, some of the rest of the leadership team. So we moved on and, I started Flux Power making lithium batteries, and he built the largest advanced hydroponics farm in the world. So we gathered some great experience since we left Aptera, and now we're back and stronger than ever. And I think we wish everybody that's ever been involved with Aptera the best. And I think they're all doing amazing things separately. We've had so many team members go to Apple and Tesla, and everybody out there has, some Aptera.
Now you actually, the original company after you left declared bankruptcy. The assets were purchased by a Chinese company. Is that how you ended up back where you are now? You were able to purchase those assets back?
They actually liquidated, which is a fine distinction, but an important one. They paid all their bills. They paid all the employees. Nobody was left hanging. They refunded all the deposits. So it was a very clean and orderly shutdown. And I think the leadership team there did very, very well to, we would have hated to, have strung out any of our vendors or anything like that. So I think it was shut down very responsibly, and some of the assets were sold off to other entities around the world, but those entities didn't exist when we reformed Aptera and started to regather the intellectual property portfolio and trademarks and stuff. So it was just great timing. Steve was back from Abu Dhabi, and I was wrapping up my time at Flux, and it was just like it's time to get back together and make this happen.
Yeah, we don't have a lot of patience for, he and I both, in dwelling in negative energy. We've have collected our own thoughts of, well, what are the lessons learned? What can we do different? And then have moved on. And so I think, we do have a list of lessons learned, a list of things that we have done different, that we've even done different with Aptera now, that are learned from that past experience. And I prefer to look at it as maybe it was a training ground for today. Like, it was meant for us to go through that then so that we would be ready today when the market is actually here, when the demand is here, when the batteries are at the state that they're in, when the solar cells are at the state that they're in. We will have a much bigger impact today than we would have had 10 years ago, I think.
And I think it's very important, really, to be able to be comfortable with that part of Aptera's past and that part of Aptera's history, and not to have any kind of animosity or frustration over it, because it's part of the company's story. And I think most people who are watching Aptera today understand that it was a difficult time in history, and that nobody who's at Aptera now was at Aptera at the time things didn't work out the way they did. And, I've worked with many people over the years who I am still friends with, who we had professional disagreements with, and they said, yeah, sorry, I don't think I can work with you anymore. And we went on and did our separate thing, and we're still here and they're still here. So, that's a very important part of the story. Now let's talk about where Aptera is along that very long path that goes between an alpha prototype, then into betas, then into production, intent, and validation, and ultimately series production. Where are you on that journey?
We're still in early alpha, and we're talking with Chris and I are on conference calls from 7 in the morning till I don't know, midnight,
past
10:30.
midnight last night.
Yeah. So to give you an example, we already have 2 vendors that we're working with to quote our durability testing, both to gather the data on the road and then to put it on the 4-post machine that has to be configured for 3-post. And then we want to get them a beta vehicle right away so that they can start that process within a month or so. So our partner that is actually handling our ERP system, our bill of materials and all of that for us, they're already looking out to say, what do we need to begin quoting now, or in 3 months from now, or in 6 months from now, that sort of thing. So teeing up all that stuff, going through the alpha, beta, and then the early release glass, for example, the changes we have to make in the glass. So when it's heated up, it folds easier and nicer. We're in the middle of we're at the beginning of all of that, and it's firing on all cylinders. The COVID has been a blessing a little bit because it's forced us to work with people not only outside of our state, but outside of our country. And in many cases, it's opened up more doors and more opportunities because we're able to get more things done. We're able to get them done faster than we could 10 years ago. We can multiply our efforts in parallel. So every one of our vendors is complaining, about our speed and how quick we want to move. But that's just how both of us are. We're going to have this vehicle for sale at the end of next year.
And that's a lofty goal for an established mainstream brand, let alone what is, to all intents and purposes, a startup. I'm assuming that you're working with, you've got an expanding team that's representative of all different parts of the industry.
Yeah, we've been working with Monroe and Associates for quite a while now, since the beginning of this year. And they've been amazing at kind of getting in early and examining our architecture and working with us on kind of IP and HVAC strategy and those sort of things. We're going to work with them to start to lay out our assembly lines later next year. But we have a long way to go and a lot of new partners to engage in the next few months. But we've learned so much from this vehicle, and we have so much we learned 10 years ago that I think we're well positioned to have a very strong beta candidate that's very close to a release candidate. It just needs to run through the typical validation cycle. I've built many, many boats. Epic Boats built a ton of boats in the thousands. And, our turn cycle from ideation to getting a boat into production was less than 6 months. Usually 3 months of design and tooling and fleshing everything out, and then another 3 months to set up the line and scale production of that boat. But we would introduce a couple new models every year. So, that's the marine manufacturing side, and automotive is, marine manufacturing 6 months, automotive 36 months. We're trying to be in between somewhere. So we want to be on the low end side of that, and we're working with some great partners to help us execute on that. We don't want to be closer to the automotive scale of 36 months because we think people, we have thousands of people that want this vehicle now. So we want to get it in their hands, and we want to get it in their hands quick.
But I mean, you've seen the video. online, for example, from Elafe. I mean, they've put their motors through a full automotive development cycle, durability testing. We actually did durability testing 10 years ago with the previous vehicle. That doesn't mean that we get to skip it now, though, because there's new composite attachment points. The structure is different. So all of that has to be tested again. But at the time, there were no red flags stopping us. So it really is, I would say, this minutia of, here's a circuit board for our main controller. Can we get enough chips? Are there enough chips of that chipset on the market within the time frame? Some of these automotive chips have 6-month lead times. And so, those are the kinds of things that we have to start worrying about now.
Before we finish, there are a couple of things that I feel I need to ask, unanswered questions. Now, you've said publicly that you can't talk about charging yet, so I'm not going to ask you about charging. Some eagle-eyed people had seen certain connectors being used in the alpha prototype that may or may not indicate something is happening, and you said, we're not going to be able to talk about that yet. The other company involved has quietly admitted that other companies are using their charging equipment, so I'm just going to leave it at that. And anybody who's watching who is in the industry who knows what's going on is probably smiling to themselves, because I haven't said anything publicly, and neither has anybody else. But one thing that I do have a question on, and that is cameras. Now, your alpha prototype there doesn't have rear view mirrors. It has rear view cameras. And you've already said if you have the solar roof, the never charge option, that's solar on the front and on the roof and on the hatch at the rear, you don't have a rear window, you have a camera instead. Now, unless I'm very much mistaken, FVMSS, Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards, doesn't yet say that rear view cameras are okay on cars. But is it something that you guys are being able to work around because Aptera is technically a three-wheeler and thus a motorcycle?
Yeah, the restrictions on motorcycles are much different than automobiles, and the rear visibility in a motorcycle is a much different effort than the rear visibility on a car. So we may have in production some manual mirror to be compliant. But we expect that the visual tools that we offer people are a much better safety mechanism and offer people a much better view around the vehicle than that maybe small compliance mirror that we have to add to stick to the restrictions for motorcycles.
Yeah, we have several ways to get out of that or navigate around that, I would say, and we also have a strong lobbying effort as well.
Yeah.
So.
You do want a backup, in case maybe a system goes down or something too. So I think there's some logic in that. But now they have screens that display through mirrors, and that makes it very easy to have a very large mirror that turns into a screen whenever you want it to.
Let's talk about where we're at now with the reaction to the rebirth of the Aptera. I can tell you for a fact that it's been one of our most popular videos this year. And I'm sure you've had an insane amount of interest as well. So what's that been like?
My email box is full, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
It's been an exciting 2 weeks. The previous 3 months have been a whirlwind. A big thank you to our team who've all come together, from the engineering side to the build side to the marketing side, everybody just working so hard to get this thing launched. And you kind of have to set a date to make things happen. And, once you set the wedding date happens, even if the flowers aren't done. So that's kind of the situation that we were in was, we need to launch the vehicle. We need to launch it now. There's so many reasons why. So, let's put in the time, the 3 a.m. nights and those things to make it happen. And after launch, we were expecting that we would find a lot of old fans that love us and hopefully a lot of new fans. But, 1,000 pre-orders by the end of the year, I think would have been great. And I think we would have been tremendously humbled by that. But to be 5x that, in just a couple weeks is, even more intense. So
it's much more than we anticipated. We anticipated there would be interest, but I get an alert every time someone orders an Aptera, and my phone has just been buzzing here the entire interview and all day and every day. The orders keep coming in. People are very interested in this vehicle, and so it's our burden now to actually make this and deliver it to people, and that's what we're going to do. But I I am overwhelmed with the support and the interest that has been shown.
It is great that you've got to such a high number of vehicles in such a short time. It's certainly not, as large as some companies out there, but then this is not a conventional car, and I think that you have to have some kind of give and take on that, because this is not a car that a lot of people would even consider. But for those who like a car that is super efficient, a car that is a little bit quirky, people like me, then I think that you have managed to capture the imagination. And given the number of pre-reservations that you've hinted you've got, I suspect I'm fairly high up on that list now. Just thinking about my number, I think I'm in the 200 or 300s maybe. So we'll see. Thank you very much for joining me today, gents. Before we go, I want to know, is there something that you have been particularly pleased by to this point? Something that you've been particularly surprised by? Or something that you're particularly proud of as to where you are today with Aptera?
Yeah, I think having so many former team members back from the original Aptera is just great. So many people that were so passionate 10 years ago to bring this vehicle to market, and were in a position in their lives, over the last 9 months to come back to Aptera and do engineering for us and marketing for us and help us with the builds. It's just great that so many people still have such a passion for this. And then echo that over to the other side. People put down their money and they waited very patiently for a vehicle 10 years ago. And we were so humbled, for the $500 deposits that people had made. And I meet people all the time and shake their hand and thank them wholeheartedly. But those people have largely come back. And we're just, so blessed to have people that still just have love for the idea and love for the Aptera and have come back into the fold and said, I want a new one. Here's my $100. Put me in line. And, I want all the fixings. Give me 1,000 miles. Give me the solar, give me the off-road package. I think it's just great.
My experience has been similar. I guess the biggest surprise is the amount of global goodwill that exists towards Aptera. The idea of Aptera and the company itself. We have a vendor that we met the other day from Austria that had worked with us in the past, that found out that we're back in business and is just excited to work with us again. Whether it's old engineers, whether it's vendors, there's a lot of goodwill out there for Aptera, and people are just excited to be able to extend that to us, and we're very humbled.
It has been an absolute pleasure chatting with you both. I hope to catch up with you again sometime soon. And frankly, I hope to come down to San Diego and see your facility when COVID is over. As always, thanks to our $15 to $49 a month Patreon supporters. They are rolling past me to my right. Also, special thanks to our $50 a month patrons. That's John Lyons, Regine Fellows, Jeffrey Songster, and Tesla in the Gong. I love that name, Tesla in the Gong. And our deepest gratitude to our $100 a month Patreon supporters. That's Marcel Ward, Reggie Watts, JP Fagerback, Sean Ueda, Will Graylin, and Ian. Just Ian, no last name. Just Ian. You can join all of these amazing people by becoming a Patreon supporter yourself. You'll find the link below on how to do that, as well as a link to Ko-fi or Bitcoin. If you'll fancy yourself by sending us a coffee to support the team. We do run on coffee, although I'm not allowed really supposed to have any coffee anymore, but don't tell my cardiologist. That's our little secret. But you can send us money through Bitcoin, and it's a new digital age, and we have a little Bitcoin client running on the server that we have to keep running for other things all the time anyway, so it's fairly green in that regard. Also, if you want to support us by buying some merch from our swag store, you can do that. There's a link to the Redbubble store down below, and of course there's also Discord. Join in, have a chat with the rest of the team, have a chat with the rest of the fans, talk about this episode, and pass the time as we wait for 2020 to bugger off into the sunset. I hope that you enjoy the rest of your break if you are indeed having one. If you're not, thank you for continuing to work. You are an invaluable person, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. I'll be back soon. Keep evolving.